Good late afternoon, early evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for the FEMA Town Hall. My name is Rhonda Montgomery, and we're going to get things started. I'm going to start off with introducing Mr. Roy Wright. Roy is the Acting Associate Administrator for Federal Insurance and Mitigation Administration. So practically, that means that Roy is now responsible for both the federal insurance and mitigation, and the mitigation section, of course, includes both risk analysis and the risk reduction division. And of course, Roy's permanent title is the Deputy Associate Administrator for Federal Insurance and Mitigation. So Roy, would you like to say a few words to kick us off?
Sure. They gave me a title that's 11 words long, and so now I got to find a way to get rid of it. Good evening. It's great to be with you. And so this morning I had more of a formal kind of interaction with you, and this is intended to be more informal to the degree that can happen with bright lights and TV cameras with pictures coming there. I want to take a few minutes and talk about the National Flood Insurance Program and talk about where we're headed with some of these pieces. And I'll turn this around, but let me start just very plainly. Our brand has suffered tremendously over the last year. We were not able to fulfill what some people expected from us. And so as we dealt with some of the sandy pieces, we are in the process of setting that to right. We have opened a process. We had about 2,800 folks taking us to court. And we have moved forward with a whole series of settlement offers that we are pushing through so that we can set them to right. What they're entitled to under their policy, we need to deliver. Now, that's not more than what they earn, what they deserve, but we need to put that back. But we also, frankly, need to put ourselves in a position because they shouldn't have had to sue us in the first place. And so we've opened a process for the other 142,000 claimants and sent letters to all of them. We're about 100,000 letters in. There's a few more to go. Those will all be out over the next 10 days. And we are opening a process that says, if you think that you deserved more, here's a set of questions you should understand, some things you should look at, and we're giving them a process by which they can come back to us and have us re-examine their claim. Ultimately, we'll do that. We'll make a recommendation in terms of how to proceed, but we're giving them one other piece of relief. If they're not satisfied with our answer, we have a third-party neutral that they can make themselves avail to themselves. And on that side, we will go back through and look at those pieces. We have to set it to right. But more fundamentally, it looks at some elements related to how do we deal with the kind of reforms and evolution of the program. And I like to say that the system was perfectly designed to produce exactly what it produced, which means we have some adjustments to make. We have some adjustments to make to ensure that the program that we're delivering lives up to the ethos as well as the law. The ethos of FEMA, where we talk about being survivor-centric. From where I sit, as we're going through and we're adjusting claims, and they're open questions, the tie goes to the policyholder. We don't need to be squabbling around those pieces. They've been paying their premiums. They bought their policy. And so there's a set of changes that we need to make in how we deliver the program and how the customer experience plays out. And so over the coming months, we'll be doing that. Brad Kaiserman has been with us for the first half of this year, helping us with a pivot of the program. And the instructions that Craig Fugate has given me is let's go turn the volume down and finish. And so that's what we get to do. But I hold this in a place that says we're going to set this to right and we're going to fix some of the pieces and make some changes in those elements. I actually think much of the program is sound, and I think much of what is there we need to better explain and put in the right kind of perspective. But I look at this because ultimately you help us deliver the program. You're the ones out in those communities as new maps are in place, as enforcement actions are in place. Oftentimes you're the ones interacting with people who need to deal with their flood insurance costs. And so we want to make sure that we look at those elements, but frankly, once we get through this current wave and we set these things to right, then we turn to these pieces of reform as we lead to reauthorization. And so our program is up for reauthorization in the summer of 2017. The timing of that is less than optimal for me. There will be a new administrator at FEMA at that point. I may or may not have a new political boss at that point, and I imagine somewhere around day 2.5 for the new FEMA administrator, I'll get to introduce this as I'd like to introduce you to the flood insurance company you run, or at least the reinsurance program that we provide and the companies that we have. We need to go to the Hill and get this reauthorized, and you'll be spending a significant amount of time on the Hill advocating for this. What I want to do is make sure that the changes that the user community, you all being one of those key users, think that we need to make in the program, the ones that we can do inside the existing confines of the law, we need to implement. I don't want to hand every topic to the Hill. Some of you have been through that process. I can't always predict what's going to come out on the other side. I want to narrow the field in terms of what they need to help us fix. And I want to make sure that we address the elements that are there. Really, for all of the elements related to Biggert Waters and the Homeowners Flood Insurance Affordability Act and those push and pull, I actually think we're in pretty good standing. As we look at the mapping elements, we have the TMAC that is in place. We'll get the first reports from them later this year. I imagine some of those elements will require us to make some changes on a policy front. Maybe some of that requires statute. We'll look at those elements. We have reforms that we've put in place already related to the Flood Insurance Advocate's Office. Dave Stearrett has been leading that for us as we've been standing it up. I think there's more that needs to be done in that place. There's pieces of Biggert Waters that consolidated the grant programs, which we've done in policy, but we now need to see that through in terms of the regulations. But ultimately, what we have to do is make sure that we've got a program. And when I say we, I mean us, not just the FEMA element, but we, including the 22,000 participating communities that represent 98% of the population of this country, that we have a program that truly meets those needs in communities. So there's going to be hard pieces. We got to deal with affordability and actuarial soundness. I'll be honest with you. There are key elements of us that are actually a public good program. There's elements that by statute, Congress has always said, you're going to give discounts in this space. That's how Congress designed it. And I think they have some interesting and difficult choices to make in that space. And we need to make sure they have the right information and data to support that. And frankly, that you have that same information as you engage with them. So, I'm a couple days into since the announcement of the new role, but I got to tell you, with partners like you all, it is one of the most exciting challenges that I could ever imagine. And so what this is tonight is an opportunity to take those questions. Many of you gave us pieces. I'm going to hand it to Rhonda. She'll walk us through this piece. But this is an opportunity for us to take that breadth of issues across insurance and mitigation and engage with you all on those elements. You get to drive tonight. And with that, I'll turn to you, Rhonda. You'll help explain that.
Great. Thank you, Roy. So I'm going to take a few minutes. I'm going to introduce my colleagues. We'll talk through the agenda, and then we're going to get to the questions, because that's why we're here. So to my left is Kelly Bronowicz, and Kelly is the branch chief for the Data and Dissemination Branch in the Risk Analysis Division within FEMA. Next to Kelly is Lakhia, and Kayed is the Deputy Director of the Risk Reduction Division within FEMA. And then, of course, Roy, and then next to Roy is Dave Stearrett, and Dave, as Roy mentioned, is the acting flood insurance advocate at FEMA. So with that said, let's move forward to the agenda. And so we'll run through, and this is going to be similar to last year's town hall, where we will go through a series of topical questions related to the floodplain mapping, related to floodplain management and grants, and then the flood insurance. One thing that we are going to do this year is from all of the questions that you all submitted, there are some key questions that we felt needed to be answered and that the group wanted to hear, but also required a little bit of additional context. So we've asked some folks to help us with that as well. So let's move on and talk about the voting and kind of the technology that we're going to use tonight. So on the screen, you can see that there are 2 ways to vote. So let me pop forward here because we're also going to test this. So during the voting rounds, we'll be displaying the sets of questions that we received over the last several days leading up to the conference and the town hall. And then we'll be asking you all to vote on those questions that you would like answered by our panelists. We'll throw up 7 or 8 questions on the screen, give you an opportunity to read through those questions, and then I will give about 10 minutes for our panelists to answer those questions. I've asked them to answer swiftly, of course, complete answers, but we'd like to move through as many questions as possible. So again, you'll use your cell phones for the live voting process. A couple of points, at least as far as the texting goes. If you have a texting service on your cell phone plan, of course, then you know whether it is a charge, and if you don't have texting, then there's going to be a charge with that. So the other option is to use the web browser, and that web browser address is pollev.com, and that's also up on the screen. So I do want to mention very quickly that we take privacy seriously. We're not collecting your telephone numbers, and you are not going to receive spam from us after the conference. So I can say that definitively. I would ask that you put your phone on silent or buzz, because we will be doing, you all will be doing some texting, and we are going to do some practicing and opting in, if you will. So if you do plan to vote via text message, if you'd pull out your phones, and we will test this. So the first thing to do is text the word FEMA to the number 22333, and that allows you to opt in and join the polling session. So I'm going to pause for just a minute and put on my glasses so I can see everyone. All right, so why don't we move on, and what we're going to do is do a test of the system, and we're going to find out what everyone's favorite color is. So if you've texted the 2233 FEMA, that means you've opted in, and so there you go, you guys are doing it.
FEMA Blue is winning.
So as we roll through the rounds, what we'll do is we'll post the questions. I'll actually take just a minute and read each of the questions as well, and then once I finish reading the questions, we'll take 1 minute for folks to vote on those. Okay, so I think that we are ready to get started. So on the next slide, okay, we are going. So, all right, so here's the questions related to flood mapping. So question A is, how is the program ensuring maps are still being issued when the metric driving behavior is about community action? Action is an important aspect, but without effective maps, other parts of the NFIP and community decision-making are unable to function in the way they should. Question B, many areas of the nation still have paper versus digital maps, and many others have never had flood risk identified. Does FEMA have a plan for addressing the poorly and undefined risk for this population of the nation? Question C, what is the future of the CTP program? Question D, what can be done to focus more on the use and implementation of new flood risk products rather than their development? Question E, what are the pros and cons of using Zone D behind non-accredited levee systems? And finally, question F, Zone D designations have become problematic, especially for rural states. What's your strategy for Zone Ds in rural areas? Okay, we're on the countdown.
It's so much fun to watch the horse race.
It is, and it's close, so we can't even shorten the time.
Are we answering in the order of most importance?
Okay, I think we just have about 10 more seconds. Oh, actually, it looks like 30 more seconds. Okay, Kelly. All right, here we go. So we're going to start with question C, and then it looks like we're going to move on to question A, and someone's voting after the time. It looks like if you can cram in B and D, great, but we'll start with C.
Cram. So what's the future of the CTP program? I mean, you guys know this, and we've had, I don't know how many conversations at different meetings. I know Laura Algio and Beth Norton, who have run the CTP program for the last couple of years. The CTP program is not going away, so let me just open that up and say that first and foremost. And the partners are very valuable to our program. We have a number of partners, from contractors to state and locals. So we value the CTP program very much so in terms of the local expertise and the knowledge and capabilities that are brought to bear. It is important, and I know there's been a shift over the last year or so, that the CTP program is more performance-based these days, given some of the changes happening at the federal level. When we recognize that we need to continue to support the capability of the CTPs. And a couple of the things that we're currently in the process of standing up right now are focused around a collaboration center that we have up on the RiskMap SharePoint site. And I know some of you guys may already be within that collaboration site and beginning to access it, where we can share knowledge and best practices and make sure that you guys have a venue into what we have available within the program. And the other piece that I don't believe has stood up just yet, but Laura Algio has in the back of her mind, is a community of practice, where we know CTPs as a valued partner over the years may not have always had access to what's changing within the program. Opportunities to provide feedback to us potentially through the regions or at a national level. So if we can stand up a community of practice to really have that feedback mechanism, but also be able to give you guys the opportunity to hear what's changing within the program, and to share, honestly, feedback amongst each other, knowing that the state and local have different capability depending where you are. So we thought the community of practice would be a good idea in order to share amongst yourselves. So we will continue to see the CTP program go forward. I don't know offhand what the amount of money that still goes to the program, but you are a valued partner. So as you sit down, I'm gonna.
Well, I'm gonna actually hand question A back over to you.
So, Mary Jo Mullen, this is actually your question. But ensuring the effectiveness of our program, or ensuring that we're continuing to deliver on our maps, but we also have a focus around actions. I mean, we do have a vision within the program, within RiskMap, around ensuring that we've got credible, quality data out there, increasing public awareness, and then advancing actions. And we will continue to push the credible mapping that's required for the National Flood Insurance Program. But we also understand that there's an ultimate outcome in terms of resilience and sustainability and mitigation, which is the theme of this conference. I was not able to come in early yesterday due to a flight being canceled, but this morning's conversation was all about mitigation and resilience, and primary theme of the conference. So we as a program will continue to focus on actions and identifying those actions, and then helping communities find the resources to be able to implement them. I hear some music. And that we have a role. But I will point out that a majority of our funding, a majority of our budget is focused around engineering and mapping. And I believe the number is on the magnitude of 90% of our budget is actually spent on engineering and mapping. So there is a focus there in terms of our mission, but we also recognize that we can't miss opportunities to have that action conversation.
Okay, so we have time for one more. So we'll go to question D, which is what can be done to focus more on the use and implementation of new flood risk products rather than their development?
So we acknowledge that, that there needs to be a focus on the use of the flood risk products and the actual implementation of them. And we also acknowledge that early on within Risk Map, we were focused on, what are the non-regulatory products? How do they get produced? We also understood that we needed to train our partners and our providers, and ourselves, honestly, in what are those products, and then begin to talk about how they get used and communicated. So that was a focus early on, but we know we need to focus more on, once we're sitting with locals, what are the products, how do they use them, how do they use them to then message with their locals. One focus we need to have going forward is really share what are the success stories and actually have seen one of these risk map projects go from start to finish where we've produced the non-regulatory products. We've seen them actually be brought to bear when we do the engagement and see what happens on the back end. So sharing those success stories will be important as we go forward. We are making some progress in the area of making the non-regulatory products available through the MAP Service Center, which will be important for people to actually be able to pull that stuff down and see how valuable they are. And one thing to highlight that we've focused on over the last couple of months is standing up an internal team to focus on rallying around the non-regulatory products, the flood risk products, and really understand how they get communicated, how they're used within the engagement process, because we know that's the key to success is really showing the value of those products.
Thank you. Great.
Whoa. So, Dave Carlton.
You here?
Back there. So, we'll get a microphone to you if it isn't already there. So one of the things we did is we went through the questions and we imagined some of these things, it'd be helpful to understand the underpinning of it. So I'm going to read Dave his question, and he's then going to explain a little more context behind that, and then Kelly gets to go to work again. So it says, how is FEMA going to incorporate sea level rise into new maps? This is important because the current process of making maps ensures that they're out of date when they become effective, and the budget is not sufficient to allow them to be updated more than once every 20 years. Mr. Carlton, say briefly a little bit more about what you're after.
Briefly, I think that's our history. The last, even with Map Mod and Risk Map, it's been shown we don't have the budget to touch maps very often, definitely not every 5-10 years. And with the projected trajectory of sea level rise, particularly on the high end, it's not a big issue for the next 5 or 10 years, but at that point it may become a significant issue of feet over a decade or two. How's FEMA going to address maps that go out of date quickly? And I say they're out of date when they go effective because the engineering was probably done 5 or 6 years earlier.
So that's a great question, and you've probably stopped me in a CRS task force and asked the same question. And it's one that you mentioned that we've wrestled with it over the years of knowing that we can't necessarily turn over the inventory as fast as we'd like. And in terms of incorporating sea level rise and future conditions, we have, over the last couple of years, started to pilot it out. We've piloted it, I think, within Region 4 and 9. I think we might be in the process of piloting out sea level rise in Region 3. And I think that gives us the opportunity to understand what is the data that's out there, how is it that it can be reflected in the mapping products, what's the best way to communicate it, and does it actually live on the same platform as the flood insurance rate map? It's a complex issue we know we have to wrestle with, which is why the Technical Mapping Advisory Committee has this as one of their primary missions. Within the fall timeframe, they're supposed to deliver us a final report actually telling us how we should incorporate future conditions into the map. So not just tell us that it's actually important, but more importantly, tell us how to incorporate it into the mapping products. Do you want to expand on
No,
things?
I think what I'll do is now, as we hit the end of each one of these things, I want to actually make a few comments that are kind of hitting the breadth of the elements. And I think it goes to this as well as one of the questions we weren't able to get to related to the paper-based products that are still in place. And I know in all these topics, I think that the TMAC is going to come in with some thoughts on it, but so much of it, frankly, ties back to this single issue, budget. And in this year, the president proposed a $400 million budget for RiskMap. And what I can assure you is that if we sustain our funding at that level, we will be able to systematically finish those elements and ensure that we have a complete digital layer for the nation, that we will be touching maps faster than the decadal kind of view that you're offering us. And we'll be able to look at these other elements of it. But this really just comes down to a resource question. And I got to tell you, there's other years I've shown up here and I've had the privilege of defending a much smaller number in a president's budget and acting like I really enjoyed it. I could not be happier than to see that the attention that the administration has placed on resilience is translated into real requests. Ultimately, Congress has to make some decisions about how they're going to do that. I know some of you have been engaged in those dialogues with them, but we look at those elements and says, the technology has changed and continued to evolve. Frankly, we're getting more for our dollar today from an engineering and technology perspective than we would have been able to get 5 or 7 years ago. But we're also down $100 million from what we were being funded at just 4 years back. And that has that kind of cascading impact in terms of dollars available for our cooperating technical partners and the others. And so I would just really look at it and says, the opportunities that are in front of us are so much tied to that funding element. And I look forward to the president's budget request on this being met with rounds of applause somewhere.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we are going to move.
I just got a small chuckle out of that. Nothing more.
Do you want me to pause for a minute?
No, I just. Okay, I feel better now.
There you go. Okay, so our next round of questions are in the floodplain management and grants section of FEMA, and so if we could load those questions. Okay, so I'll be speedy. So,
Quickly.
Question A is this year marks the 25th anniversary of the community rating system. Does FEMA have any agency goals for the CRS in upcoming years? You guys aren't voting nearly as quickly as you did the last round. I'm just observing. Question B. Thank you. Question B. I hear stories of the difficulty in spending HMGP funds. To what do you attribute this difficulty? What reforms do you think could be made to be more effective at facilitating the use of these funds? Question C, why is there a change in business rules for FMA and PDM for the fiscal year 15 non-disaster grants? Question D, could you please take some time to explain the limitations placed on FEMA for why the non-disaster grant application period has not been able to be lengthened? 3 months is not enough time for many states. Question E, how do we get flood hazard mitigation education out into communities? And finally, question F, how do you have to have a mitigation plan to apply for a hazard mitigation grant? The 1 minute time clock is counting down.
This one's not as close.
I can hear the Jeopardy music
I can too.
playing
can
in the
too.
background.
Okay, looks like we have about 30 more seconds.
Only 30? Can I get an extension?
Looks like HMGP is going to edge.
Okay, there you go. All right, so it looks like question E will be the first question that Kayed will answer, and it's how do we get flood hazard mitigation education out into communities?
Thank you, Rhonda, and thank you all. Thank you for attending, and good evening. We have several products for education. Obviously, our premier offering is through EMI, the Emergency Management Institute at Emmitsburg. We offer a variety of courses. They involve the Floodplain Management branch, where there is a series of offerings made every month. We also have extensive series of courses on building sciences. We likewise have courses on the HMA grants development application process, and they are among some of our most popular courses. And we also have a series of courses on BCA. So those are all available for you all to enroll at EMI. Please take advantage of that. There is also a series of courses we offer through online learning. So you don't need to enroll in advance. You can do them at a self-paced study, and those are available as well. So besides what's offered at EMI, I also want to point out that some of our most effective training is done immediately after a disaster, because not only is it topical, but it is something which people feel they can use immediately. So we offer a series of courses not only to floodplain managers and local and government and state officials, but we also offer it to industry building officials, for example, or architects and engineers. Some of the things which we have done extensively over the last few years have gone out to JFOs, the Joint Field Offices, right after a disaster, and offered specific training to local officials and our own people so that we can get the message out. One of the things which we have started to do in the last couple of years, and I think this is interesting as well, with obvious resource constraints we all face in terms of travel, in terms of dollars available for training, what we have tried to do is in 3 regions, region 4, 5, and 6, implemented a Train the Trainer program, where what we have done is we have taken our own FEMA people and trained them, and they go through a full rigorous program where they get a certification at the end which says that you are a certified trainer. And what we have done is we have deployed them to states or invited the states to come to regional offices so that it's localized and they don't all have to come to Emmitsburg or to Washington, D.C. The other side effect of that, and I think this has again been very effective, is that it has allowed us to tailor our courses for specific disasters. So for example, on the BCA side, we have found that if it is a flood or a tornado disaster, we don't necessarily need to spend a full day talking about seismic hazards, which would be the 5-day full BCA course. So those are some of the things we have done to address the needs for getting the word out for training and education.
Great, thanks, Kayed. Okay, would you answer, I hear stories of the difficulty in spending HMGP funds. To what do you attribute the difficulty, and what reforms do you think could be made to be more effective at facilitating the use of these funds?
This is a perennial favorite question.
It's my favorite question.
And it's a Congress's favorite question too. Everybody looks at the dollars we have on the table, and it's a question we keep getting asked over and over again. So just in terms of round numbers, we have a total HMGP pot of money worth $12 billion, of which $9 billion is on the books and $3 billion is unobligated right now. The $3 billion number is something which goes up slightly with large disasters such as Sandy, and it'll go up again when the Sandy ceiling is adjusted. Part of the $12 billion number also includes money from disasters which are extremely old, 10 years and older, and those are disasters which have been closed. So part of the good bookkeeping on our end involves us cleaning up the books. It's just good accounting practice to get those old disasters off the books and change that 12 billion number so the numerical difference does not appear as large. The fact of the matter remains, though, that we still have $3 billion on the table after 24 months of a disaster declaration, which is a very large amount of money to be sitting on the books and not having spent. So what have we done? And this is something which is an ongoing process. We continually look at how we can best address this unobligated HMGP balance. So right after the Sandy disaster, Sandy hurricane, the President passed the Sandy Recovery Improvement Act of 2012. We incorporated several measures with that to expedite the HMGP. A couple of them, some of you or many of you are familiar with. Advance assistance gives you the tools and the methods by which you could identify projects earlier on in the disaster and scope them out. So if you needed help to identify, do feasibility studies, and do those kinds of things to enable those projects to become reality, we gave those funds available to you through advance assistance. The second thing we did was pass the program administration by states. This again was something which was taken up by Florida first, and they were a state which immediately used it on three small disasters, but we deliberately made the program very flexible and non-prescriptive. So we gave you the tools by which you could decide what parts of the program you wanted to implement and which ones you did not. The 24-month obligation rate for Florida for those three disasters was close to 50% as compared to a normal 24-month obligation rate of about 12 to 18%. So there was a vast improvement where we said, states, please, we give you the ability to run and administer this program yourself, and we step out of the way and have only a minimal auditing role. The third thing we did, and we continue doing, is BCA. We heard from you all that BCA is extremely cumbersome. It slows down the application process, and very often we don't have the tools or the staff expertise to be able to conduct those BCAs. So one of the things we did was we incorporated pre-calculated benefits, which allowed people for acquisitions and elevations to not do detailed BCAs if you were in the special flood hazard area. And likewise, along those same lines, in this year's guidance, we released the BCA for wind retrofits. So as long as you followed our building sciences publication, FEMA 810, if you were to do a wind retrofit project in either the intermediate or the advanced scale, you do not need to perform a BCA. Once again, a tool which we hope will help expedite these projects.
Great, thank you.
I probably overshot the time.
Well, okay.
So we're going to take a couple of them from the floor. Is Michael Boringasser in the room? Okay, let's get a mic over to him. He highlights this issue that I'll kind of frame and ask you to fill in some of the gaps for us. Flood insurance claims data, especially when substantially damaged, should be available to local floodplain managers via the NFIP coordinator or directly. Floodplain administrators are not always aware of where damage is occurring, especially in widespread countywide floodplains. Tell us a little bit more about this.
Well, I think it kind of speaks for itself. There's information in the insurance claim data that often indicates that structures are definitely substantially damaged, and the floodplain administrators are not aware of that. And I realize there's probably a time lag between the claims data getting out and people possibly actually rebuilding. But if that knowledge is available, I would like this to be available to local floodplain administrators. I know there are privacy issues that have to be taken care of. You just don't give it to anyone.
Right.
You could go to the NFIP coordinator and they could work with the local floodplain administrators to get this data out. Because I know there's a big disconnect in many ways between insurance and the floodplain management sector. And I think that would help.
Yeah, let me turn this with you, because I think our intent and even what we're supposed to be able to do and what's practically going out may not be connected well enough yet.
I think so. You hit the nail on the head when you use the word disconnect. The fact of the matter is that these tools do currently exist, but those tools are not always well known. So for example, if you look at what's known as the APDA, the Adjuster's Preliminary Damage Assessment, the adjusters are required to do that, and as soon as they do those assessments in the field, they're required to upload them either into BureauNet or into the data exchange. Now that is something which is available to our regional offices and to the JFOs, but very often that information is not something which is transmitted to the state floodplain manager or to the locals. So one of the things we are trying to do with Texas and Oklahoma is make sure that those tools are available to everyone and are familiar to everyone, so that when those questions do arise, we can address them. So starting next week, actually, on June 8th, between 9 and 12 in Houston, and I have the precise address here, there will be an adjuster briefing where we will reinforce these points, that not only is it critical within a matter of days to upload that data into BureauNet, but also to make sure that it's available to others, keeping in mind all the privacy requirements that you talked about.
We're going to make progress on this, and it is this piece in Texas particularly that I've been engaged with just in the last 3 or 4 days.
And I know the quick claims information that came out recently, that's helped. So as fast as we get, even if we know that there's a claim being filed in an area, we don't have to know the particular address, a street, where we can send the floodplain administrator out there and make sure they do inspections. And I've had several of them contact me over quick claims, and I'm trying to get that information of where the damage is occurring.
Yeah. Right. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go find Tracy Sears.
Oh, there she is.
Thank you. We'll get a mic up to Tracy. As the mic is making its way to you, I'll frame out this question on the grant side and ask you to fill in a bit for us. Are HMA grants available to high-risk property buildings that are not designated on a FEMA firm, but are designated on a state and or local flood map? If not, can this be addressed in the HMA program? So tell us more maybe from the Montana perspective, some specifics of what you're looking for.
Great, well, thank you. Well, we have a new local flood study that was completed in an area that the flood risk is currently unidentified by FEMA. So we are working with the community and other agencies to prepare information for the property owners. And some of the information that we're trying to include are possibly mitigation funding for some existing buildings. So our biggest question that we've been trying to work, and we do work well with our SHMO, they have not been able to get confirmation yet on whether HMA grants will work in these areas that are not identified by FEMA as high risk. And I guess, some of the other questions that have come in previous about HMA grants are in areas that are not in the special flood hazard areas. I think they go hand in hand.
So you're about to get a conclusive answer.
Great.
So Tracy, thank you for your question. So I don't know the specifics about your project, but what I can say generally is that our HMA programs are applicable anywhere. They do not need to be in the SFHA to be effective or to be eligible. So our programs, both on the FMA side, on the PDM side, and on the HMGP, we have a list of generally eligible projects, but that list is something which is not definitive or all-conclusive or all-inclusive. The idea is to just give you an indication, and we routinely get projects which are not just buildings, but other things as well, sewer projects and so on, which are eligible within our grants programs, and they do not need to be in the SFHA. Obviously, they need to be cost-effective, and they still need to meet the NEPA EHP requirements. But other than that, you can certainly apply for those projects with the regional office.
Great, and I guess on the national competitive realm, will they be able to be competitive if they're approaching with a property that's in a FEMA-recognized high-risk area?
So that's a different question. Now, as you know, the PDM funding is extremely limited. It's only $30 million this year, excuse me. And the priority there is after the set-asides, after the tribes and the planning set-asides, 20 million of that 30 is already spoken for. So we have 10 million left over for competitive side of things, so it is extremely competitive. And in the past, we have got 2.5 to 3 times the number of applications than the dollars available. On the FMA side, in the past, our priority has been SRL properties. This year, we have addressed that a little bit by including RL properties to be eligible as well on the FMA side. But once again, yes, you are facing an extremely large demand nationwide.
Thank you.
Let me grab hold of that, because this is another element that ties back to the resilience conversation we had this morning. The President's FY16 budget requests $200 million for pre-disaster mitigation. And at that funding level, far more is possible than what we can do at the $30 million level.
Correct.
So I would commend that piece to folks as you look going forward. A couple other final comments as we look at the elements related to these risk reduction elements that are in play. We do get a lot of scrutiny on the grants about how we deliver on them, how those pieces, how we move those dollars. And we're working to become more efficient with that. But one of the ways that I actually begin to see this is the point by which states are looking at larger scale projects and being able to put that in their mitigation plan and be ready to go. We need to see the obligation rate for HMGP to be well above 50% going forward. And we're going to keep adapting the program until we get to that point. But I also want to highlight the floodplain management side of the equation, because this is the critical link, particularly as we deal with the not yet built environment. The ability to ensure that we are building higher and stronger, at least to the point to address at least the minimum standard of the base flood elevation, and many standards, those higher elements, and ensuring that we have a proper enforcement, we have proper kind of follow through on those elements, are critical to where we go in those elements. We've seen some of that play out in southern Texas and some of the communities, and as devastating as it is, the loss of life in some of those particular communities have been hit so hard. I'm encouraged by some of what I've been able to see in Harris County and Fort Bend County and some of these others in terms of the work that is placed in terms of the specific mitigation projects as well as the approaches they've taken on the floodplain management side. I think we're very much beginning to see that kind of payoff work.
Great, thank you. Okay, we are going to move on to insurance topics, and I was going to start reading before they popped up, so here we go. Question A, what is going to happen in April 2016 with the properties newly mapped program, and will the rates go up 18%? The next question, question B, when is the grandfathering rule going to expire? Question C, does the interim office of the flood insurance advocate just handle insurance inquiries, and how do I contact the office? Question D, if areas of interest or concern are identified through the risk map process, is there a perception that an insurance rate increase is soon to come? Question E, why does a subgrade crawl space receive a rating increase even when it is only a matter of a few inches? Why do structures with basements not receive any credit for having flood vents? And finally, question F, where is the interim office of the flood insurance advocate located in FEMA, and who does it report to? Here we go.
So B was the dark horse here.
Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom.
Ah, there it is.
There we go. Thank you. Next year, you get the Jeopardy music. Detroit, is that where we're? Grand Rapids.
Grand Rapids.
And Rhonda, you said this was a lot more exciting last year? Like people were rallying for stuff?
Maybe. I think they still are.
Yeah, but I don't hear any cheering.
We're in the South.
I mean,
Hey, people are far
All right.
more reserved when we're down here in the South.
That's right.
Where were you last year?
Okay. Okay. So we're going to go with question A first and B second. So question A, Dave. What
Okay.
is going to happen in April 2016 with the properties newly mapped program, and will the rates go up 18%?
So there's nothing real magic on the April 2016 date. To answer this question, the properties that are newly mapped will be eligible for the PRP policy, and they will gradually go into full risk rate. Now, what that means for some of those properties is there's a couple classes of full risk rates. The first class is those that are be eligible for the Zone X rate. For those policies for folks that are, for instance, post-firm, they will be eligible to go into the Zone X rate. Also, pre-firm policies with continuous coverage will be eligible to go into the Zone X rate. Now, having said that, that's pretty good news, but as you know, the Zone X rate is a pretty expensive policy these days. And we often get asked why the Zone X rate, the BC and X zone rate is so high. Well, the program sees the BC and X zones as essentially a residual risk book of business. And what we mean by that is most of the folks, the majority, over 50% rated Zone X are actually in either a V zone or A zone, and they're being grandfathered into the Zone X zone. And that's the main reason why those Zone X policies are so expensive. For instance, if somebody is truly outside of the special flood hazard area and they haven't been damaged before by a flood, they'll be eligible for a PRP. A PRP runs $300 to $400 a year, whereas a BC and X zone rate runs $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 a year. So there's a group of folks that can go into that Zone X rate, gradually into that at an 18%, up to 18% glide slope per year. Then there's another class of rate which you use the elevation certificate and the effective flood insurance rate map, and that will get you what the person really should be paying. In some instances, when these pre-firm structures in particular get elevation certificates, many of those in fact have their lowest floors above the base flood elevation, at or above, and they end up with flood insurance rates that are in fact more beneficial or much cheaper than the Zone X rates. So that is the main thing is the folks are going to be going into these at up to 18% glide slope per year over a period of time. For some of these folks, it's going to take years for them to get to that full risk class rate, and some will be a little closer. Now, all of this is predicated on the current law that's in place, which is kind of a combination of BW12 and HFIA. Who knows what 2017 summer has in store for the program that may change what I just described for you.
Great, thanks. So we're going to go through two more questions, question B and question D. And if you want to throw in anything about the advocate, go for it. So question B, when is the grandfathering rule going to expire?
So there currently isn't any plans to get rid of grandfathering. BW12, Section 207 of BW12, in fact, did get rid of grandfathering. FEMA never implemented that portion of the legislation before the HFIA kicked in 2 years later. HFIA rolled back getting rid of the grandfather provisions. So FEMA currently retains its administrative authorities to retain grandfathering, and we plan to continue that unless directed otherwise by Congress.
Okay, and then the next question, if areas of interest or concern are identified through the risk map process, is there a perception that insurance rate increase is soon to come?
Well, there may be a perception. We don't have any current plans to do that. I think this may be referring to some of the non-regulatory products through risk map, things like depth grids and things like that. We don't have plans to rate flood insurance using those products. However, there are things like the Limois zones in coastal areas where, the first step in charging flood insurance rates is to actually identify the zone. So we've started putting the Limois on all of the firms, all of the coastal firms, and that could be the step to kicking in some sort of increase in those coastal areas. And the Limois is that area that is subject to wave action from 1.5 to 3 feet. We can tell you kind of anecdotally that in those Limois areas, we're paying very high claims in those areas, even though they're eligible for regular riverine AE zone rates. We've kind of kicked around in the past how we might kick in increases in the Limois zone. One of the things floated was to just kind of redefine the V zone. For instance, way back when they set that threshold of the 3-foot breaking wave to to identify the V zone. We now know, based on wave tank analysis and actual losses out there, that waves 1.5 foot or greater result in damages that are much worse than A zones. The problem with just redefining the V zone to 1.5 instead of 3 feet is you increase the cross subsidy within that zone. In other words, somebody that has a structure that's subject to 1.5 foot breaking wave would be paying rates the same as a structure that could sustain 6 foot breaking waves. So we're kind of looking at a scenario where to get the data where we can actually have the hard and fast data to prove and to justify, quite frankly, higher rates in that Limois zone, because we expect that if and when we do go down this road, our masters on the Hill are going to want a thorough explanation as to how we came up with the rates in that Limois zone and why they're paying more than they had to pay before.
So I think I see John Miller up here. We'll get a microphone moving in your direction. You have that? It's on its way. I'll start framing a question as it comes your way. He writes, there's been discussion of needed training of flood insurance agents following errors identified in Sandy claims. How about local floodplain administrators? Why does FEMA not require basic training for these life and property safety officials like other public safety professions? Seems like a lack of knowledge is costing the NFIP dearly. Say more.
Sure. Well, Roy, thanks for calling on me. I'm trying to do this in Trenton, basically have legislation passed to require basic training for local floodplain administrators. As our New Jersey chapter. I do have a full-time job, so it's a little hard. But Oklahoma, Arkansas, West Virginia, and New Mexico have done this, and I'm using the New Mexico model actually as our example legislation. You know, in the state of New Jersey and also in the state of Pennsylvania, you have barbers, hairdressers, manicurists. They all require some kind of licensing because it's a public safety issue. We've also seen in the post-Sandy world, Union Beach, Highlands as examples where they're using the best available data in rebuilding, not the effective. So they're not using the most restrictive. And this is required, I'm sure you've heard about it. Senator Menendez comes to you and says, well, hey, we need to give these people a break. So we need training at the local level. The good kids are getting the training. We're providing that training. What about everyone else? And so that's my question to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll cover the insurance agent issue first. You know, we do hear of policies being rated incorrectly. I can tell you just from my personal experience, I have family members and friends that purchased flood insurance policies and were not sold the right product. Okay. I have family members that did substantial improvements to their structures, elevated at 5 foot above the base flood elevation, and went in to get re-rated and to get their coverage increased, and the agent kept them as a pre-firm property. They discovered it years later, and they should have been paying much less than they were. I've had friends that were outside of the special flood hazard area that went to purchase a policy, and they were sold a BC and X zone product, when in fact they should have been sold a PRP because they clearly qualified for it. One of the things that there's a Sandy task force that has been stood up at headquarters to deal with the Sandy claims problems, and one of the things they're looking at is this issue where we have a very bare bones training requirement for agents that sell our product. It's a one-time training for 3 hours, which is not adequate, and what we find is many of the agents that sell a lot of flood insurance, in fact, do a really good job, and they do it right. But we do have a number that are not doing a good job and perhaps are just writing a few policies a year so that they're not as familiar with it. There's not a mandatory training for them. There's not a certification. We don't certify agents like we do adjusters, for instance. So One of the things the task force is involved with, and they've engaged the advocate's office, is to look at this issue and see if, number one, FEMA should establish an actual certification for insurance agents that sell our product, or at a minimum have some sort of minimum yearly training requirements beyond the one-time 3 hours that we know is just not adequate. And I can definitely see, even before the 17 reauthorization in July, that we'll be moving in a direction establishing more stringent requirements on insurance agents that sell flood insurance. As far as the local officials, FEMA has worked with the association over the years and, in fact, provided some of the seed money and continues to fund the CFM program because we get so much out of that. There are now thousands of CFMs, nationwide. As you pointed out, John, some states require CFMs to be floodplain administrators now. Quite frankly, that can have some unintended consequences. For instance, in one of those states that you mentioned, when the CFM requirement came into being, we saw at headquarters, my permanent role as the Floodplain Management Branch Chief, where we do enrollments and withdrawals from the NFIP. So one of the unintended consequences of that was communities that no longer had a CFM on staff actually, by the law in that state, had to withdraw from the NFIP because they didn't have a qualified person. I think that FEMA would look more to the incentive than making it a hard and fast requirement, especially based on that experience in that one state of seeing communities actually leave the program because they didn't have proper CFM certification. It's been recognized that we need to get better on the delivery of training to the local officials. EMI is great, but the problem is, I was talking to Tom Hurt, recently, and the NFIP 101 course at EMI trains about 170, 180 people a year. As Roy pointed out earlier, we got 22,000 participating communities out there, got a large turnover in the floodplain administrators in those communities, 2 to 3 years on average. You're dealing with a new person. We need to get better at both field delivery and online training for those floodplain administrators, because recognize, because it's a collateral duty, many of them, even if EMI had the capacity to train in large numbers, in many instances those locals are unable to leave work, to leave all those other duties for a week and go up to Emmitsburg, Maryland, and get trained on floodplain management. So we look forward to continuing to enhance the training and really, pushing the CFM program, which I think has done a lot of good. We know from the NFIP evaluation that was conducted, finished in about 2005, that the good news is, folks, we're getting better over time. There's no question about it. I can tell you, without a doubt, they looked at the compliance nationwide in a 15-year period. The 15-year period started at about 1990, and it went through 2005. And then they broke up those time periods into 3 blocks, 90 through 95, 96 through 2000, and 2001 through 2005. And what we found is that last block there through 2005, the compliance on the structures that they actually went in the field and surveyed was much better than the block from 1990 to 1995. So we're getting better over time. We attribute that largely to the big push nationally by the states, FEMA, and others on getting folks trained up.
Thank you, and particularly not just for your answers, but for your work. I love all my children, but Mr. Stearrett is his background that really cuts across the work at a local level in floodplain management, his work in mapping.
So can I talk about the advocate?
That's what I'm taking you up for. Has been an absolutely exceptional at helping us stand up this office, not just standing it up, but what it means to actually represent us and the breadth of what the office does. A lot of it is insurance claims and policyholder driven, but also involves some of the other things related to mapping. If you could quickly just give us a sense of where that's at and what you're focused on.
Sure. So one of the most common questions we get is, does a flood insurance advocate just deal with flood insurance? The answer is absolutely not. We deal with all 4 legs of the stool, right? Insurance, mapping, floodplain management, and grants. To kind of break it up for you, probably about a little over half of the inquiries are predominantly insurance related. And as you know, in this room here, it's usually never just one issue of those 4 legs. There's usually at least 1 or 2 of those other legs involved. Insurance issues usually involve some sort of mapping component in floodplain management. So a little over half are dealing with insurance. About a quarter of the inquiries that the office is receiving have to do with flood hazard mapping issues. I expect that 25% to go up substantially as we roll out those new maps in New Jersey and New York here later this year. We also, about 10% are dealing with floodplain management, and another 10%-ish is dealing with the grants. So we deal with all 4 legs of the stool. How does one contact the advocate's office? Right now, to be quite honest with you, we have an acting staff. I'm acting in the position, and we have a total of 5 people. So there's not a large capacity to deal with a large number of inquiries coming in. We do a limited amount of casework, but folks can, and when I say folks, by the way, I don't mean, actually don't mean a lot of you in this room. We're talking about policyholders and property owners. Those are the folks that need to be contacting the office once they've navigated all of the existing processes, which would include the call centers, dealing with the NFIP state coordinators, dealing with their local officials, the FEMA regional office, and the programs at headquarters. Once all that has been navigated and the individual still feels like they haven't been treated fair by the program, then it would be appropriate for them to contact the office. And the email address is insurance-advocate@fema.dhs.gov. It's an email address. We currently don't have an 800 number stood up yet. We may be doing that sometime in the future, but right now the inquiries are coming in through that the email address. Some of them are getting on the internet and finding my and other folks in the office phone numbers, which are not too hard to locate. And we're also receiving inquiries in from the Hill, from senators and congressmen who have particularly thorny issues that they would like the advocate to dissect. And our job is to not look at issues from the program's perspective. It's to look at issues from the individual policyholder or property owner's perspective.
Yeah, and I've had a couple of things that actually have hit my desk, and you look at it and it says at its face, something failed in the system. And I have referred things directly to the advocate's office and says, let's take someone who is clearly frustrated and confused about our programs and ensure that they get what they deserve and are treated fairly in the process. And that really is at the heart of what the advocate's office does. A couple comments on insurance, and I think we are coming in to land our time, as you always every year enjoy spending your dinner hour with us. As we look in these insurance space particularly, and as we look at these reforms and we change what our customer experience looks like, there's a couple of key elements to it. One of them is ensuring that we have a better way to detect and monitor the experiences that people are having. That needs to happen at the point of sale. It also needs to happen at the point by which claims are in place. We're going to run an experiment that we'll be announcing this next week in Texas and providing people an 800 number that says, if you're in the claims process, you've reached out to your agent, you're in that, but you hit the point by which you are confused or frustrated, here's the number you call. We'll have an intake process by which we can do that as a way by which we can detect and monitor and keep a pulse on that. Never again do I want to have people, thousands of people suing me before we're ready to actually make a change. We have the ability to pivot along the way, and we have to do so. But we also have to look at the brand, and we've got to look at the pricing realities that Congress has given us in the law, because we're losing policies right now. We've lost 300,000 policies just in the last year, and that number will continue to go down as the renewals play out this year with the additional surcharges, particularly for second homes and businesses, where they could have a PRP policy and be paying $400 a year. And by law, we are now required to charge them a $250 surcharge on top of that. We're concerned about what the retention rate may be in those places. And friends, that has a direct impact on revenue. That has a direct impact on the revenue that goes to the mapping program as well as to floodplain management, which includes CAP SASE. That's where those dollars go that come out of the fee side of the equation. And so we've got to look at ways by which we can continue to maintain that and make sure that, that this product is seen as valuable and that we're following through on the elements that is there. I'll have more to say about that in the months to come. If you have particular ideas on that front, reach out to us. If you have ideas about how we improve that customer experience, experiences that you have had, let us know. Again, we want to make sure that we're putting that in place. So I want to kind of wrap things up. I think that's where I'm at in the evening, but let me check in with the boss. At the end of the day, I want to kind of pick up on a theme from this morning. There's a lot of work that FEMA does. And the work that my team does is imperative, and I'm proud of the work that they do. But the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, is about 22,000 participating communities. And that's not about us. And so we need to make sure that we're living up to our ideals, but also understand that so much of this is dependent on you. And so I very simply want to say thank you. And I want to make sure that we pledge that in this partnership, we are collectively learning and improving and leaning forward in a way that's agile, not simply anchored to the way we've always ran the program, but ensuring that we are reflecting the realities that are in front of us, addressing the needs of communities, ensuring that people build higher and stronger going forward. We should not be making investments on the federal side twice in the same location, the same structure. But most importantly, I have a duty to the policyholders to ensure that what they have paid for in that contract, we follow through on. And that is a commitment that I am committed to ensure that we live up to. And I'm sure that you will help us know when we meet that mark. So with that, I say thank you and good night.